All right, welcome everyone to the intelligence unit. Let's begin. All right, so first we are going to define intelligence and give a very brief little history on how the field of psychology has thought about this kind of nebulous abstract idea of intelligence. So, a little thought experiment here on the first slide. Your friend got a 1500 on the SAT. That means they're really smart, right? Is that the same thing as intelligence, doing really well on college admissions exams? Some people would say yes. Some people would say no. How do you define intelligence? It's one of those things that we all kind of know what it is. We can know when someone is smart, when they have intelligence, and we can also kind of see when someone doesn't have intelligence. But that's not satisfying from a scientific perspective. We want to be able to define things in a more concrete way. So that's what researchers in the field of intelligence research are trying to do, trying to turn something abstract and nebulous into something concrete and something that can be studied in a laboratory setting. So, is intelligence the ability to use reason and logic? Is it the ability to write and speak clearly? Is it limited to your performance in school? Is it your behavior in social situations? Maybe it's just knowing when you're wrong. Or maybe it's a combination of these things. So we're going to dive into this more concrete definition here. And that's really the heart of the issue. How do psychologists define intelligence? That's what we want to know because that's what we're going to be talking about here. And to be honest, there's many psychologists out there that study intelligence, which inevitably means there's many different theories of intelligence. And I just want to briefly mention this field of psychometrics. This is kind of one of those subfields in psychology, and psychometrics deals specifically with how we use tools like surveys and tests to measure these abstract concepts in our minds, like intelligence. So, psychometrics deals with many different cognitive abilities, intelligence being one of them. And that's what psychometricians do. They create measurements to sort of measure these hard to measure things. And one of the findings from this field is that we have evidence for a sort of underlying general intelligence ability, meaning there seems to be evidence for a part of our cognitive abilities that influences all the other cognitive abilities. Some people have this to a high degree, some people have this to a low degree. But this one ability that we're eventually going to call just G seems to exist to some extent. And this is what most people think of when they think of intelligence, some sort of underlying trait that influences every other cognitive ability. So we're going to talk a little bit more about this, but that's a brief introduction to general intelligence, or G. We also have evidence for what we're going to call S, or specific mental abilities. Specific mental abilities are sort of the opposite of general intelligence. You kind of see that in the names there. Specific mental abilities refers to your ability on a specific task. So, how proficient you are on a very specific task. Let's think about, some of your stereotypical IQ test tasks. You might do the analogies. Blah 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 is to blank, just like blank is to blank. You can study those metaphors or analogies, and you can get really good at that one specific task. But that doesn't necessarily mean that just because you're good at the metaphors, that you're going to be good at another task, maybe like a word search or a spatial puzzle or anything like that. You're really good in this one area, but that doesn't necessarily translate to other cognitive areas. So these are sort of the opposite ends of the spectrum here when it comes to intelligence theories. We've got people making a case for there is one underlying component, one underlying cognitive trait that influences all of our cognition. That's G, general intelligence. And then there's other people saying there's no such thing as G. What you have is many different S abilities, many different specific abilities in specific tasks. Is there some sort of general underlying intelligence or just proficiency in many different mental tasks? That's sort of the heart of the issue. So, from the field of psychometrics, we can start to narrow down what we think intelligence is. We can start to form that concrete answer, that operational definition that we're looking for. So, intelligence is the degree of adaptive success in people's behavior. Again, that sounds pretty vague, but that's less vague than just saying someone is really smart or not. So, to break this down even further, intelligence is our ability to adapt to, shape, or choose our environment. It's our ability to comprehend and reason. It's our ability to manipulate objects and symbols. It's our ability to act purposefully. And lastly, it's our ability to communicate effectively. So these are all different areas that psychometricians have decided constitute intelligence. And again, you have this debate between G and S. Okay, is there one underlying cognitive trait called G that influences every single one of those abilities on the slide? Or is there simply 5 different S abilities? You have 5 different specific tasks, specific abilities that you can be good at. And that's the heart of the debate right there. Is there one underlying form of intelligence or many different subforms of intelligence? So let's talk about the history of IQ tests, the history of measuring intelligence. The original goal of an IQ test was to determine whether or not a young child would benefit from special education services. They were not meant to determine if an individual was smarter than another individual. They were meant to identify children who might not benefit from a normal school environment, who might need a little extra help or different help outside of the normal classroom setting. And to be honest, they're still pretty good at that. That's what IQ tests were originally designed for, and that's what they still do best. They don't do a good job of telling you whether or not you're smarter than your friend or your boss or your coworker. You can't really look at 2 IQ tests and just because one number is higher than another, you can't say, okay, this person is smarter than the other person. People do that, and there's just a tiny little kernel of truth to that, but that's not what IQ tests were originally designed to do. And myself and a lot of other psychologists would argue that's still not what they do. So originally, these IQ tests that were meant to determine if children would benefit from a normal school environment or if they needed special education services, they were not based on intelligence theories. That is more of a contemporary thing. IQ tests today are based on intelligence theories, so they are very different from how they were decades and decades ago. Okay, so moving on to Spearman. Spearman was one of the first to develop an intelligence theory. And here he even stated in this original theory the debate between G and S. And I'm just going to reiterate this again because I know it's kind of a difficult concept to understand. The G side, the general intelligence side, is saying that there is a single underlying cognitive ability that exists in our minds that influences every cognitive ability we have. If we have this G to a high degree, then we will be good at everything else. We will be able to communicate clearly. We will be able to adapt to and change our environment easily. We will be able to solve puzzles very quickly and effortlessly. And that is related to the amount that we have this G ability or G trait. S is referring to the fact that G doesn't exist, or if it does exist, it doesn't have as big of an influence as you might think. The S side of the argument is saying that you can't point to one single underlying trait. What you have is many different tasks that require many different skills. So if someone is really good at puzzle solving, then they have had a lot of practice at puzzle solving, or maybe they have some sort of innate trait that allows them to solve puzzles really well, but that has no influence on their ability to communicate effectively. Those two tasks are unrelated. So what you have is basically just a series of semi-independent cognitive abilities that do not influence one another. What we find, and what we often find, is this. The answer lies somewhere in the middle. Yes, through years and years of research, we have determined that there is something akin to this general G idea. It does exist. There seems to be some sort of underlying cognitive trait that influences all other cognitive tasks. But at the same time, we also have a good amount of evidence for these S abilities. So the answer lies somewhere in the middle. There's a compromise out there. So let's talk about that a little bit more. So this diagram might make it a little more clear in your minds. G, that general intelligence trait, influences all abilities. S, your specific ability in one area, only influences specific abilities. So in this diagram here, it's kind of a really messy Venn diagram. We've got this white circle in the middle with G. So G is your general ability. And then we've got these four different ovals branching out from the middle. Those are your S's, your specific abilities. So your logic ability, your mechanical inclination, your how good at math you are, and spatial abilities. Each of these S areas, these S ovals, they have very little overlap here. They're semi-independent of themselves. So I hope this diagram kind of makes it a little more clear, but you've got this middle area, this G, and you can see that, well, if it wasn't white, you could see it a lot better, that is overlapping with every oval. So G influences every S, but every S is semi-independent. Yeah, there's a little bit of overlap here and here, but for the most part, the S's are independent. The G influences every S. All right. So, most modern theories of intelligence incorporate both ideas, G and S. Let's talk about Cattell's view of intelligence. And we're going to make a distinction between fluid and crystallized intelligence. So, fluid intelligence is your ability to solve novel problems, it's your ability to gain new types of knowledge. Think of it as your ability to learn. So fluid intelligence is your ability to learn new things. Crystallized intelligence is your factual knowledge about the world. Think about like math facts or the meaning of words or just general world knowledge. So Cattell makes a distinction between the ability to learn and then knowledge that you've gathered throughout your lifetime. So how are these two related? So fluid intelligence is usually measured by puzzle assembly, pattern recognition, those kind of typical IQ test tasks that you might think of. Fluid intelligence task scores are correlated, which would be evidence for that general underlying trait, which is kind of what Cattell is pointing at here. So let's look at this graph here. And this graph on the y-axis, we have intellectual development. Think of that as IQ or overall intelligence. On the x-axis, we have time. So we have different stages of your life: infancy, childhood, early adulthood, middle adulthood, late adulthood. So this dotted line represents fluid intelligence, and everything under this curve is shaded in blue. And this solid line represents crystallized intelligence, and everything under that is shaded in yellow. So as we age, we see both fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence increasing. We see this very strong straight line coming up until we get to about early adulthood. Excuse me. And that's where things start to deviate. So this dotted line, which is fluid intelligence, starts to level off. And then in about middle adulthood, it actually has a pretty marked decline. So what this represents is that our fluid intelligence, our ability to learn, starts to decline around middle adulthood. You see, it never really reaches zero, but it definitely starts to decline. So early on in life, we're learning new stuff like crazy, and we're pretty good at learning new stuff. But as we get a little older, it becomes a little harder to learn something new. Think about like a foreign language. When you're a little kid or an infant, you can pick up on a foreign language and make it a native language like nothing. That's almost effortless. But as you become a middle adult, well, that's a lot harder to learn a new language. But take a look at the solid line, crystallized intelligence. It just keeps going up and up and up and up and up. Only until you get to about middle or late adulthood, more like late adulthood, does it even start to taper off. But it never starts to decline because we're always learning new things all throughout our life. So crystallized intelligence, which is our store of knowledge about the world, is going to constantly be increasing. We're always learning new things. But the rate at which we learn them, which is fluid intelligence here, does start to decline in adulthood. So that's Cattle's view of fluid and crystallized intelligence. Another very famous theory of intelligence is Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences theory. Howard Gardner, he proposes 9 different types of intelligence, and he has added to these over the years. He made a big splash with this theory at first. A lot of people have kind of shied away from it now for various reasons that we'll get to. But let's talk about the 9 types that he mentions. So the first 3 are linguistic intelligence, logical mathematical intelligence, and spatial intelligence. These first 3 are very similar to other psychometric theories of intelligence. He's not breaking any new ground. He's not making any huge waves with the supposition of these 3 types. But the next, we'll talk about these 3 first. So linguistic intelligence: meanings and sounds, mastery of syntax, appreciation of language. So linguistic intelligence refers to how you use language. Do you read a lot? Do you read easily and efficiently? Can you write effectively? Can you make your ideas known easily by readers when you write them? Do you write grammatically correct? And do you have sort of an appreciation of language? So do you enjoy poetry or fiction or something like that? And then we have logical mathematical. This type of intelligence, according to Gardner, this is the understanding of objects and symbols, actions on objects / symbols. So math is all about symbols, and if you are good at math, then you would have a high degree of this type of intelligence. And then the third Gardner multiple intelligence type would be spatial intelligence. So this is your capacity to perceive the visual world, transformations upon perceptions, recreate aspects of visual experience without physical stimuli. So people who have a high degree of spatial intelligence, they might be architects because they can sort of visualize spaces in their minds very well. People who perhaps, architects is really the only one that's coming to mind right now. But that would be one of those like puzzle solving one IQ test tasks that they might give you on an IQ test, where you have to like put the pieces together in a certain way and make a larger picture or something like that. So those are the first three, but then the next six are unique to Gardner. He kind of came up with these on his own. And we'll dive into each of these specifically in the next few slides. Starting with musical. So musical intelligence, it's kind of self-explanatory. This is your sensitivity to individual tones and phrases of music, how we combine tones and phrases. So people who have a high degree of musical intelligence, probably not surprising, become musicians. Bodily kinesthetic intelligence. This is the use of one's body in expressive or goal-directed purposes, capacity to handle objects skillfully. People who have a high degree of bodily kinesthetic intelligence would be athletes or dancers, um, other things of that nature. Inter and intrapersonal intelligence are the next two. Interpersonal refers to how you interact with other people. So inter means how you interact between people. People who have a high degree of interpersonal intelligence, this is the ability to notice the moods, temperaments, motivations, and intentions of other people. So people with a high degree of interpersonal intelligence would make good leaders. They would be good people to have on your team, good coworkers. These might even make good politicians. They can kind of read other people's motivations, maybe how to direct their behavior. Intrapersonal intelligence is within. So how much you know about what's going on in your own mind and body. Intrapersonal intelligence, this is the access to one's own feelings and abilities, control of behavior, recognition of strengths and weaknesses. So people who have a high degree of intrapersonal intelligence, these might be those people that you would call like an old soul, people who are really calm. They don't get down on themselves when they do something wrong or they mess up. They kind of know how good they are at some things, how bad they are at other things. These are the people who just, they're kind of calm. They kind of know what's going on in their own noggin. All right, next two, naturalistic and existential. These two are kind of relatively new to Gardner's theory. The naturalistic intelligence, sensitivity, and understanding of plants, animals, and other aspects of nature. So people who have a high degree of naturalistic intelligence spend a lot of time in nature, might be naturalists, farmers, conservationists. They're in tune with how the natural world works. And then lastly, we have existential intelligence. This, in Gardner's idea, is the sensitivity to issues related to the meaning of life, death, and spirituality. That one is super vague. So let's talk about some issues with Gardner's multiple intelligences theory. Now, this word intelligence is notoriously tricky to define. That's no secret. A lot of people have struggled for a long time to accurately describe what intelligence is. But we have to realize that if we use the word intelligence to describe too many things, then the word starts to become useless. So, for example, do we really want to use the same word, the one word, intelligence, to describe things as diverse as calculus skills, knowing yourself really well, like those intrapersonal intelligent people, speaking 6 different languages, or the bodily kinesthetic intelligence, being able to make the throw from midfield to home on a baseball field? Those are all skills that I'm not trying to diminish any one of those, but do we really want to use one word to describe those incredibly diverse skills listed on that slide? I would argue no. I personally think that if you're going to use one word to describe such varied skills like that, then you are making that word useless. It means too many things to be useful in a scientific context. So if that's the case, then we have changed the meaning of intelligence. We no longer have anything resembling that G, that general underlying cognitive trait that influences all parts of cognition. We only have many different S's. We only have, according to Howard Gardner, 9 different specific abilities. And you can have any one of those to varying degrees. Probably not surprisingly, but this is still hotly debated. There's a lot of people still on Howard Gardner's side. There's a lot of people against him. Just like any other good old-fashioned academic debate, it gets pretty fiery at times. So let's jump to the present day. First, let's figure out how we got here. Let's talk about modern IQ tests. And actually, my 30-minute video is about to run out of time, so I'm going to stop it here, and then we will finish up modern IQ tests on the next video.